Oh, wait. Before I play a video game, let's talk about this this take. Just real quick. I'm interested. I want to hear the leftist argument for not voting. Let's check it out. This is from a channel called Zekzizi. I don't know how to say it. But here we go. Convince me not to vote.
For a long time, I've made efforts to separate myself from the stereotypically far left position of condemning voting. I've admitted that voting doesn't take long, it's fine to encourage somebody to vote who might not otherwise, and that generally there is a meaningful difference between the two major parties in the US and the UK. My skepticism around voting has come from the inclination of various leftists to put their full organizational weight behind liberal candidates like Biden or Stanmer, and end up being subsumed into these parties that hate us and our beliefs and leave our own goals unpursued. Ultimately, though, I'm still arguing for a position of balance rather than outright condemnation. That being said, I believe recent developments have left this analysis obsolete, and that radicalism must now take a much more ruthless position to keep up with the changing consciousness of the wider public. The ongoing genocide in Gaza has led to a noticeable shift in attitudes in liberals and leftists alike across the West. We've had to watch as our political leaders march lockstep with Israel's brazen attempts to displace Palestinian people with no outlet for resistance in conventional politics. And then with the elections in the US and the UK coming up this year, this is naturally leading people to question whether or not the...
I would say that the outlet for resistance via conventional means remains relatively the same as it always has been. Organizing protests, being loud, being inconvenient, continually getting our message out there, and picking and choosing our battles wisely. For example, I think yelling at Joe Biden, very good. Make him flustered. Yell at him everywhere he goes. Ask him why he is not making a ceasefire happen. Make his life day to day a living nightmare when he goes to order his ice cream. I don't necessarily support the same thing when it comes to people like AOC. I'm sure many of you have seen the video of her being like harassed at like a movie theater by people who just want her to say, like, they just want her to call what's happening in the Gaza Strip a genocide. And like, as a sitting member of Congress who has already witnessed like others in her party get censured over this, like, there are some very practical reasons why she would not want to do that, even though she is doing everything she can to bring about a ceasefire. She is not the mover and shaker here. If you want to yell at someone, yell at Nancy Pelosi, yell at John Fetterman, yell at the milquetoast, spineless dipshits in the Democratic Party. No, like, you don't be like harassing one of your best allies in Congress on this issue. So you organize stuff like that, and then you organize stuff like the uncommitted campaign. Things that are basically the Democratic Party has to take notice of. And I advocate for yelling at spineless dipshits in places of political power because they're the ones most likely to be moved over.
These genocide enablers even deserve our votes to begin with. And then from there, especially in the US, you've had the typical discourses of harm reduction and lesser evil voting spin up too. Today then, I want to make the case explicitly against voting as the strongest strategy that the left currently has available.
Cool.
Now, because my usual video production process apparently takes months or even years now, I'm slapping this together at a much lower production quality just so I can get it out while it still has some relevancy. For anyone wondering, I am also working on a much longer, much fancier video on the side, but that's still a bit off from here. So. I just realized my neck is purple because my floor LED is on and it's too late to turn it off, so...
I actually thought
If
that
you're
was...
wondering, I'm not diseased, that's just...
I actually thought that was an interesting aesthetic choice.
Why? So, the key observation of the current moment is that the rejection to vote is the most effective path towards radicalization. Due to being presented a choice between different genocide enablers, a shift in attitude against voting has taken place for many younger liberals and leftists alike, with the previously unthinkable of not voting for anybody being taken seriously. What's special about this is that not voting is a fundamentally illogical, nonsensical position, yet despite this, people are being drawn to it anyway. This is because, in a political landscape such as ours, still mired in capitalist realism, where alternatives can scarcely be imagined, let alone be made feasible, resistance can often manifest as a desire to reject society altogether. In a sense, the only response to a world in which revolution or even reform feel hopelessly out of grasp is to simply declare, I cannot imagine a new future, but I don't need one to reject the present existence anyway. The urge not to vote is one such instance of a blind resistance. The desire to escape the
you guys remember, right? I've talked about this. Like the clothing of apathy and surrender as something radical. Simply do nothing. Like just out of curiosity here, and maybe this will be addressed later on, but how exactly does one expect this protest to reach anybody's ears or to be taken into any real consideration if your suggestion is don't do anything about it? Or at the very least, don't vote via don't vote, don't participate in the system via conventional means. Then the powers that be in that conventional system don't pay attention to you. Most people in America don't vote anyway. There's no meaningful way for people in positions of power to discern who's taking a principled stand in not voting versus someone who is simply busy or not plugged into politics not voting. Honestly, very knifey duck. I find the distinction between being lazy and calling it virtue and being apathetic and calling it virtue is indistinguishable on this point, I think.
perpetual dilemma of lesser evilism by rejecting its premise outright. This desire is, again, raw, it's base, it's unrefined, it's often ill thought out, but this is exactly what defines it as a complete rejection of existing society. Because in rejecting these systems, we also reject their rules, their internal logic, and their entire framework of what makes sense. While those who subscribe to the logic of existing superstructures, our political systems and the electoral process, will insist on how simple and obvious just voting is, that can't change the fact that the desire not to vote is a seed by which a radical desire to change society can grow. Once this rejection bursts to the surface, an incredibly effective path to radicalize these people is to take those base feelings and turn them into a cohesive political worldview. This plays on the same dynamic we saw in 2020 over abolishing the police, an at the time immediately intuitive idea that cleared the way to radical thinking, yet also made no sense within the framework of existing society. And today, this type of demand takes the form of something far simpler, of not having to support genocide. What threatens this budding radicalism is that it must immediately clash against the facts and logic of existing society, which demands that these alternatives are born fully formed and able to meet standards which they're trying to move past to begin with.
I don't agree that not voting is the birth seed of like a new political ideology. Uh, to me, it's just recontextualizing actions that most people in America would have taken anyway. And you can have radically different politics while still understanding that you should vote to, if for no other reason than to stave off fascism and buy more time for your emergent political ideology to become more coherent. Because I can tell you one thing that will destroy emergent political ideologies that differ from the status quo and the norm, and that is fascism. Radical apathy does not change the system. It does not bring about solidarity with others. It does not do anything. It is apathetic at its core.
If we don't vote for the Democrats, how will we beat the Republicans? If we don't have the police, how will we prevent crime? It's the job of superstructures like the media and the political system to forcibly drag these intuitive desires down into the mud of policy and electoral pragmatism, where they lose any radical potential. This was the fate of abolishing the police the moment it became defund the police, which, ironically enough, in trading in its radical content to be more appealing to conventional politics, did a far worse job at grasping anybody as a position than abolition ever did. Voting is
No one else succeeded in abolishing their police departments. There also wasn't a widespread abolition of police departments. Like, overall budgets went down like 2% and then they went back up. If we had more people with radical politics invested in our current system, we could get things like ranked choice voting that would make multi-party systems possible. We could get things like defunding or even abolishing the police passed. But that requires getting invested in organizing people. And one of the most effective ways you can do that right now in a liberal democracy is by organizing for the lowest possible entry point for political activity, and that is voting. That is the like asking people to spend 15 minutes to 30 minutes of their time one day every 2 to 4 years is the lowest possible ask. And if you can't get people to organize to do that, then you're not going to be able, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, you can't get people to organize to do bigger things. Like, for example, abolishing the police without an electoral, solution. Like, in this person's ideology, you still would need to organize enough people to, destroy the police department, say. And that's a whole hell of a lot more commitment than just showing up to vote to ensure that fascism doesn't take over.
Is especially vulnerable to this because its radical content consists of simply not engaging with a system at all, with no immediately obvious alternate mode of activity. Of course, in reality, no longer allowing ourselves to be tied up in the spectacle of electoral politics frees us up to do all sorts of things, but this won't be immediately obvious to most people.
I'm sorry, how exactly does not spending 15 minutes of your time every 2 to 4 years free you up for so much more activism? What exactly does that free you up to do? The assumption here being, I suppose, that people who turn up to vote obsess over electoral data, watch MSNBC constantly, are plugged into the news 24/7, and that is simply not the case for the vast majority of people.
Begin to question the basis of voting, and they'll be continually beat over the head with the idea that it just takes a day to vote. We can postulate about various forms of direct action, mutual aid, and activism in general we can get involved with instead of party politics. It is
By the way, I would argue that you don't necessarily have to organize within the party. Organize in your local community. And then you can plug that organization into, hey guys, go vote. Or, hey guys, we're going to volunteer to go canvassing and door knocking and phone banking. But then at the end of the day, you still have the organization of people that you made, willing and able to do things like mutual aid in the community. You can think of these, maybe these structures as like, I don't know, communities. Could also organize through the DSA. True, Gamergy. But like the idea that these two things are completely divorced, I think is odd, to say the least. Depending on where you live, voting might take basically an entire day. Okay, even if I grant that it takes an entire day, that's one day out of like, what, 700? Or one day out of 1,200? Like, I think we can afford to do that. Especially considering that, like, the types of direct action this person's talking about in the video would be larger time commitments than that.
unequivocal that the most impact that anybody in the West can have on the Gaza genocide is
like, let me put it this way. Okay? Let me put it this way. You're in a Saw-like scenario, okay? You're in a Saw-like scenario. There's a man on the other side of a chessboard. He has a gun pulled out. And he's like, I'm gonna kill all of your friends. I'm gonna kill all of your friends if I win this game. And then you're like, well, I'm just not gonna play. And then the guy on the other side of the board kills all your friends. Your principled apathy here is not accomplishing anything. It's a de facto surrender.
trying to prevent shipments from reaching Israel, as has already been done in the form of unequivocal that the most impact that anybody in the West can have on the Gaza genocide is trying to prevent shipments from reaching Israel, as has already been done in the form of strikes and direct action. But what has decisively changed about this analysis is that we're no longer trying to propose just a better way to organize. The focus is now on an amplified potential for radicalization. However, the crucial element of this particular shift in the...
I would argue that if the cost of that radicalization is allowing a fascist to get into a position of power over the largest military on the planet, that your political radicalization means exactly diddly squat, because they're just going to kill the politically radicalized. Even if you grant that this is a way towards political radicalization, which I disagree with, frankly.
Political moment is that it tears open a deep schism in the current left. The position, at least in theory, for the harm reduction left was that we could support lesser evil candidates while at the same time building a radical movement of our own. The situation at hand undoes this excuse though, because now the two goals are explicitly opposed. The task of a left concerned with winning elections is now to squash this sense of anti-electoralism and any radicalism that comes with it.
You know what's going to squash anti-electoralism by granting you the inability to participate in politics. It's a thing called fascism. If you think the DNC is bad, wait until you learn about fascism. The idea that, like, oh wow, the DNC exists, so they're going to crush anti-electoralists. No one can force you to vote. Most of the people in the United States don't vote. Unfortunately, they're still bound by the results of elections. By not voting, you cede ground to out-and-out fascists. And if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, here's an example, okay? Here's just an example from today, okay? Let me throw this up here real quick. Here is Nick Fuentes, right wing watch. Got this clip over here, and it's a bit of a doozy. Let's take a look at what one of the loudest fascists in the country is currently talking about. Let's dive in.
You know what's awesome about Trump is he's like 80 years old almost, but he looks fucking hot. All these other 80-year-old guys, all these other 80-year-old white guys look like this. Have you ever realized? A lot of people make fun of Trump for his look, but John McCain was like the same age, and he looked like a dork. Like, this is what John McCain, this is what John McCain looked like in his 70s, or I don't know how old he was in this picture. And then you look at Trump. And Trump just looks like a beast. So people say, oh, you're orange. Your hair's stupid. He looks fucking awesome. He looks hot. So you could either look like this when you're 70, just look like another boring white guy, just look like a lame old cracker. Or you could look like this Aryan Chad, Hitler-esque, Caesar-esque, Mussolini moment, Napoleon, men who will define epochs. Liberals are like, this retard is like, well, the Trump voters are super loyal because last week they said Biden was too old, but Biden's the same age and 100% of them say that he's fit to... It's like, yes, we embrace the contradiction because we die for the man, Donald Trump, because we die for the personhood of Donald Trump and what he represents.
To support him.
She's like, but that's a contradiction, but you can't do that, but that's not logical. Trump gives the order, we follow. It's as simple as that. You can never understand.
Even though he's the incumbent, didn't.
That just Nick Fuentes there talking about how he and other fascists would literally die for Donald Trump. And this is the time you want to play chicken with an oncoming freight train of fascism. And you want to pretend that your radical apathy is going to give birth to, well, again, you've already admitted in this video that, like, it doesn't have to give birth to anything. So really, you're just arguing for, on some intangible, personal level, your politics could be radicalized by not doing anything. That by not voting, you're actually a brave warrior, bettering yourself. Damn the consequences. Damn the overall effects. Damn the actual material conditions we are subject to. One would think that an account run by someone who claims to be a Marxist would actually understand the material reality that we currently live in isn't confined to your personal betterment as a human being. But please, continue to try to convince me here.
The line of electoral leftists today is to play our society's superstructures, to correct these raw desires to escape the present moment back into current society, into lesser evilism. To be explicit, it is to play the role of the reactionary. As such, any leftist who has invested in the short-term opportunism of electoralism now has a choice to make. To either shift focus to where radical potential really exists, or to forsake radicalism and fully submit oneself to their role as the left of bourgeois society.
Like, you understand what they just said here, right? They just said, oh, I'm gonna back it up here. Okay? You have a choice to make.
To either shift focus to where radical potential really exists.
They're saying that the place where radical potential actually exists is in the block of people who choose not to vote as like a principled stance. I disagree that that's where radical potential really exists. You're just justifying a decision to not meet the barest possible standard of engagement with political reality. Marx wouldn't agree with this. No, Marx was a proponent of using bourgeois electoral politics in order to achieve left-leaning goals. Marx wrote about this. If you forsake one of the most valuable tools in preventing the rise of fascism, as a fascist is currently rising in power, you are not a radical leftist. You're a radical collaborator.
Or to forsake radicalism and fully submit oneself to their role as the left of bourgeois society. Meanwhile, the task of a left concerned with building...
That's right, folks. If you choose to vote, you're really one of the bourgeois. You're just on the left of bourgeois society. You're no longer a proletariat. You're a class traitor because you voted.
Radicalism is to explicitly encourage the feeling to reject voting and nurture it into an established political worldview. Let's be...
Again, I love that in this video, this person is advocating not for any particular ideology to come out of not voting. They're just saying that by not voting, you're creating the potential for all kinds of other political ideologies to take hold in your brain. But they're personal political ideologies. They're not group political ideologies. They have no power. In fact, explicitly by not voting, you cede any amount of power. By not organizing in electoral politics, you cede power to others.
Be clear quickly, though, there isn't some principled stance here against the act of voting itself, like is often found among, for instance, anarchists.
I feel like the dichotomy you just articulated kind of indicates that you feel otherwise, but okay.
Physical act of casting a ballot literally does not matter. So if you feel more comfortable voting anyway, then please.
It sounds like they are trying really hard to sound smart.
I'm sure they have, like, some good ideas, but, like, this is not one of them. I like that basically they're like, oh, I don't want to, you know, if you are in my audience and you want to vote, you're fine. You're one of the good ones. You know, but just be aware your voting does not matter. You're just doing it to be more comfortable with yourself. And, like, I would argue that the entire argument you have made so far for not voting in this video has been to be more comfortable with yourself by soothing yourself and telling yourself that your act of apathy is actually some sort of radicalizing moment for you.
Go nuts. The key is allowing and encouraging people to explore the idea of not voting and how we might engage in politics otherwise, such that we open the way to new forms of thinking. Now,
like what? What, like, I want them to, like, take the next couple steps. Like, okay, what's one of the possible ideas that you think would be worth ceding power in this current election cycle? Material power, material organizing effort. What is the ideology you think would come out of this that would be worth that? Because currently it just seems like you're going, oh, I don't know what will come out of that. Maybe something cool, and that's just okay. So it's not even that you want to radicalize people to any actual ideology. You just want them to be radicalized to something, and you think it might be good, maybe. So let's roll the dice on that. That seems particularly brain dead. Also, yeah, Morgan Drury, I agree. Local elections absolutely matter. Like, there was a news story about I think a year or two ago, about a small town in either Wisconsin or Illinois. Might have been a suburb of Chicago. And the idea, or not the idea, but in this video that came out of like a small city council meeting, there was one guy on the city council who made an impassioned argument for allowing homeless people to be able to sleep in the senior center. Now you might think, oh, well, that's not great. But the issue was that the reason he was making that argument is because it was going to get down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit wind chill outside that night. Meaning that if that one guy hadn't been elected on a local level, the homeless population of that town or city would have died, because there was no place else for them to go. So when we talk about the importance of engaging in your politics, in your elections, it is literally a matter of life and death. Might not be a matter of life or death for you if you're in a privileged enough position, but it is a matter of life and death for somebody somewhere. You know, your local government is making choices on a daily basis about what quality your drinking water should be. You know, what policies your city has regarding homeless people. What funding your local police department gets. And if you aren't getting involved on a local level, at the very least, if you can't be bothered to engage in like stopping fascism on a national scale, at the very least be bothered that you can get involved in your local politics to elect local officials. Because if you don't get involved in that process, well, the giant car dealer just outside of town that is able to drop $1 million on the election absolutely will. Are you kidding me? You want to cede power? Oh, it's such a radical position to let the local car dealership own your local government. It's such a radical position to allow your local government to have officials in positions of power that will make the decision to switch your water source to save pennies on the gallon. of drinking water from the tap. Oh, oops, it turns out that you just that decision poisoned the entire town. Because you local elections elected a conservative. Oops. This is I cannot describe to you the amount of contempt I have for people who advocate and posture and virtue signal and try to make this is a fairly intellectualized argument, but at the end of the day, I feel like this is simply what I've called it, a call to radical apathy. A call to radical surrender and a call to radical collaboration.
The obvious objection from here is that this is done at the risk of letting Trump win, and there is no way around this. But what is failed to be grasped is that this is simultaneously the strongest strategy in fighting Trump and far-right populism in general.
How? You have 3 minutes to explain to me how exactly ceding electoral power to the far right and far right populists and Christian nationalists, open fascists, how does not engaging with the most prominent form of political denial, how does refusing to engage in closing the doors on them politically, how is refusing to engage here actually effective?
Now, let's be clear, this isn't an accelerationist position. The goal is not to make Trump
win.
Well,
again, this isn't a position on anything other than not voting. Again, your specific argument here is simply don't vote, because by not voting, you will radicalize yourself to some kind of political ideology. And frankly, one of those ideologies one could be radicalized towards is accelerationism. So it's not explicitly an argument for accelerationism, but it is potentially an argument for accelerationism. And I think the effect would be accelerationist.
And the idea is not that his winning would improve anything. Rather, it's recognizing that lesser evil voting is a pathetically ineffective strategy at fighting the far right. And I would go as far to say,
is it as politically ineffective and pathetic as not doing anything? Because the argument here is that you are advocating for is not doing anything. And to be clear, you haven't advocated for any kind of direct action per se to replace not voting. You've simply said that not voting is a good in and of itself.
That anybody who dedicates themselves to it at the expense of everything else is more responsible for Trump than anyone who would forgo voting for the sake of building radicalism. Even without looking at history, this should be self-evident by the fact that Biden was voted in as a safe, middle-of-the-road establishment candidate just to get Trump out, and now a single term later is running the risk of losing to Trump again. Consider as well that the whole time Biden has been in...
Yeah. That is how elections work, isn't it? Unfortunately, we don't have any better options. And, it turns out we don't elect dictators for life unless Trump gets into office.
Republican states such as Florida have only spiraled further into quasi-fascism at a seemingly faster rate than ever, pushing...
Do you think that would happen if more people in Florida organized for Democratic candidates? Do you think that Florida would continue spiraling far right if left-leaning candidates were elected. Florida is a Republican stronghold state. It is a microcosm of what will happen if Donald Trump gets elected president. Saying, oh, see, voting doesn't matter. Florida is conservative. Well, guess what? I can make the exact opposite argument. Voting works. Look at Minnesota. Minnesota, despite all of the red policies of all of the red states in Florida, Minnesota got things done. And it's not perfect, but we've also, because of our democratic participation in politics on the local and state level, Minnesota has had transgender protections since the 90s. Since the 1990s. On a statewide level. That's just one example. We now have in Minnesota, because people organized to vote on a state and local level, our state has a free school lunch and breakfast program for every child that goes to school. Ensuring that children, regardless of their income level, have good nutrition. Oh, but it doesn't work because Florida is conservative. Shut the fuck up.
Pushing all weight behind Biden again does not make Trump and the far right go away. Rather, it allows them to fester for another term and then come back the next election cycle even stronger.
Counterpoint. Every time we delay fascism, we also gain 4 more years of being able to build up our own organizing power. Even if you grant, oh, we're just delaying fascism, then good. Let's delay it for as long as humanly possible while we build up our own organizing and direct action apparatuses, so that if fascism does come into being, we're able to adequately resist it, as opposed to this form of radical apathy where you're just not able to resist it, I guess, because none of the people who are radically not voting are actually organizing together. They're just virtue signaling to each other online on Twitter. And again, I love how they said they weren't talking about, oh, it's not accelerationism, but also we should stop preventing fascism from taking hold, which is explicitly an accelerationist take.
And so, if you remain tied to lesser evil voting out of a belief that anything else is simply impossible, it is your duty to be rushing to make it possible when the material conditions provide an opportunity like the one presented to us right now. All that's being done—
Again, the opportunity to radically not vote. Something that the majority of Americans have done in every single election ever.
Instead is propping up a liberalism which fascism feeds off of. And so eventually they—
Alternatively, you can defeat fascism. The idea that because you have a liberal society means you will inevitably have fascism, I think is A, wrong, and B, all the more reason to delay it as long as possible for us to build up an actual left-leaning political movement that is able to topple liberalism in favor of something better. Because the alternative that this person is putting forward is simply caving to fascism and then what? Again, the idea here that, like, we should cave to fascism We, America, should fall to fascism. The global hegemon with the largest military on the planet, with the largest nuclear stockpile on the planet, should fall to fascism. I think that this is a deeply anti-radical, anti-leftist position to take. Trying to argue that this is a left-leaning position? No, it is not. This is a fascist collaborating position. This is openly calling, well, we should collaborate with the fascists and help them rise to power because their rise is inevitable. And then once they rise, they'll kill liberal society, and then we're trapped in a death cult until the rest of the world bands together and destroys America, or I guess America conquers the world and the March of Centuries degrades its empire until it fractures and splits. You effectively, in my view, when you're advocating for the global superpower to become a fascist empire, you're not a leftist.
They will win if this is all we can do. If it's not over Gaza today, it'll be over something else tomorrow. And when they inevitably do win, don't you think it would be important to have a pre-existing group of radicals that are able to actually kick into action and help?
Yeah, the pre-existing group? You mean the group of people who hasn't organized together? The pre-existing group of people who has done exactly jack and shit deliberately in order to assist the rise of fascism. Oh, what are they gonna do? Yeah, they're gonna get to work with car bombs. They're gonna get to work as like an active insurgency. These limp-wristed people who couldn't even like be bothered to go and cast a ballot to try to stop the rise of fascism. No. They, they're actually all super giga-chads, and they're all going to rise up against fascism when it finally takes power. This is LARPy bullshit. This is LARPy, pathetic bullshit. Advocating for the collaboration with fascism.
Those who are going to suffer the most under this far-right government. Even today, the marginalized living under Republican states are far more likely to be aided by local groups of communists than anybody else.
Yeah, I'm sure that people in marginalized positions in red states prefer to be helped by local communist groups more than they prefer having, like, I don't know, laws protect them. Like, you think that, like, trans people are like, oh, fuck yeah, we live in a conservative state like Florida where we've just lost our Medicaid coverage of HRT and surgeries. Fuck yeah, we can be aided by communist groups to get those things. Get the fuck out of here. Yeah, trans people in like North Carolina are like, fuck yeah, it's now a felony for us to use the bathroom. Well, at least we'll be aided by local communist groups. What are you on about? This is deeply missing the point of discrimination and systematic persecution in favor of, again, LARPy bullshit about like underground groups of communists being able to supply the needs of marginalized people, and you think it's going to get better under a fascist? An explicitly fascist federal government? You think the government that is currently being planned to be completely gutted and replaced by Project 2025, a Heritage Foundation plan? You think it's going to get better if fascism takes over on the federal level? This is delusional.
And again, even today, the only way to effectively help Gaza is to try and prevent shipments from reaching Israel. Like I said, this is already being attempted, but it hasn't been strong enough to deliver results just yet. Efforts so far are being easily co-opted and pacified by...
Oh, wow. You're saying that the only effective way to do this thing of stopping shipments to Gaza is to actually do it, except that none of those efforts have actually been successful. Yeah, let's just take a look here.
From reaching Israel. Like I said, this is already being attempted, but it hasn't been strong enough to deliver results just yet.
And somehow, by not voting, you will become strong enough to stop the shipments by some magical property. Is this like spinach for leftist, where they, you know, it's like Popeye, they down the spinach, they get big muscles and are suddenly able to stop the entire boat from leaving harbor? This is magical thinking.
Efforts so far are being easily co-opted and pacified by career activists. But imagine what could be done if, instead of supporting the Dems and arguing over whether or not we're obligated to vote for them, we poured our energy into these forms of resistance instead.
Yeah, because again, voting is so much harder and so much more time consuming than organizing a blockade, like a grassroots blockade movement against Israel. Keep in mind that literally members of Congress have been more successful in holding up aid to Israel than any grassroots communist movement to prevent aid from being shipped to Israel. Like, they're saying that, oh, well, blocking the ships will just magically get better. Meanwhile, the electoral approach has actually been delaying that aid to Israel. God.
Even from an electoralist perspective, there's value in rejecting
Am I trans? Yes, I'm a trans lady. She, her, please.
Today for the sake of pushing people left, to increase the possibility in the future of a left...
Again, how does not voting push people left? At no point in this video have they made the argument that by not voting, you're able to coalesce a radical base of support around yourself. My God.
This candidate becoming viable who could actually maintain a victory over the far right. These candidates don't just materialize out of thin air after you've waited long enough. They grow out of the pre-existing political landscape. And they're far...
No, I'm not pro-Israel. I'm pro-decolonialism. Yeah, I don't like the fact that they are currently killing tens of thousands of women and children. I'm not a huge fan of that.
More likely to gain traction under one full of people so radical they wouldn't even entertain the notion.
Also not a fan of far-right authoritarian states that try to become right-wing dictatorships.
Of voting for a genocide enabler. One might suggest that we might not be able to build a radical movement strong or large enough to actually affect the difference needed here, be it in direct action or in pushing for a Bernie 2028 run. But if this is the case, then we also haven't convinced enough people away from voting to meaningfully affect the result of the election. So that's my pitch to not vote.
I disagree. The idea, oh, well, you know, if we were able to get enough people to not vote and get Donald Trump into office, then we'll be strong enough to do more cool forms of direct action. You haven't made the connection here that people who don't vote are directly being funneled into like grassroots blockade action or grassroots direct action. In reality, what you have is a small fraction of people who are going to be radical non-voters going into those more direct forms of activism. It's not a one-to-one correlation, and pretending it is again, deeply unserious.
In 2024. I know I pretty much just spoke about the US today.
No, well, and that's the thing, Morgan Drury. We can do direct action and vote. You can pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time. the idea that it's one or the other is genuinely baffling to me.
But if you're in the UK, you already know that everyone already agrees Labour is as bad, if not maybe worse, than the Conservatives, especially if you're trans. So I didn't think it was really worth talking about that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, I do have something longer and more fleshed out and edited and blah 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 coming out, hopefully in a month or two. So stick around for that. But either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see all you lovely people again, hopefully soon. Bye.
Bye.
Mars at these alternate.
I didn't like that video. That was Zakzizi. I've never heard of them before.